The eviction notice had come suddenly, and Rachel wasn't ready for it. The words on the paper were cold, cruel even, and they hit her like a punch in the stomach. She had been struggling for months, trying to keep her family afloat. The bills piled up faster than she could pay them, and the rent was the hardest to keep up with. Her children, Jake and Lily, didn't understand what was happening. To them, everything seemed normal, until they saw the look on their mother's face. Rachel had tried to keep it together, to shield them from the weight of it all, but now there was no avoiding the truth. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, had always been a cold man, but even he seemed to have no heart. The note said they had 30 days to vacate the apartment, or they'd be forced out. The moment Rachel saw the letter, she knew there was no room for negotiation. He didn't care that she had 2 kids to take care of, or that her husband, Mark, had been laid off from his job for nearly a year. Her hands trembled as she looked at the paper, but she had no choice. She had to act quickly. There was no time to waste. The thought of finding a new place, one they could afford, seemed impossible. How could she possibly find a home in the middle of all this chaos? But she had no choice. She would fight for her family, no matter what. With a deep sigh, she sat down at the kitchen table and began to make calls. She knew that something had to change soon. Little did she know, that change would come in a way she never expected. Days passed in a blur of phone calls and applications, but nothing seemed to work. Every time Rachel thought she was getting closer to a solution, another door slammed shut. The stress was unbearable, and she could feel the weight of it on her shoulders as she tried to keep a brave face for Jake and Lily. Her husband, Mark, was doing what he could, but the job market was tough and his confidence had taken a hit after so many rejections. One evening, Rachel was sitting on the couch, staring at the pile of unopened bills on the coffee table, when there was a knock at the door. It was Mr. Thompson, the landlord. She hadn't expected him to come in person. He was never one for face-to-face interaction, but there he was, standing in the hallway with his usual smug expression. "I'm just here to remind you, Miss Carter," he said with an air of indifference. "You have 2 weeks left. You're still not off the hook, and I expect you to be gone by then. If not, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities." Rachel's heart sank. The humiliation of it all felt like it was swallowing her whole. She tried to hold it together, but his words stung. She forced a smile, even though she wanted to scream. "I understand, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "I'm doing everything I can." He gave her a dismissive wave and turned to leave, but then something caught his eye. A small sign hanging outside the building. Rachel had almost forgotten about it. It had been put up earlier that day, just before Mark had come home. "Sold," the sign read. The building had been sold to someone new. Mr. Thompson stopped in his tracks, and for the first time since Rachel had known him, he looked worried. He stared at the sign, his face pale, and then his eyes snapped back to her. "What do you mean the building was sold?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Rachel was taken aback. "I don't know, I just saw the sign today." Before she could finish, he walked away quickly, muttering under his breath. She stood there, confused. What was going on? Why was Mr. Thompson so unsettled? She hadn't expected him to react that way, but the truth of it all began to settle in slowly. The building had been sold. That meant the landlord no longer had control. Could this be the break they had been hoping for? Rachel wasn't sure, but she couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. Little did she know, this new twist was only the beginning. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Rachel tried to find out more about the new owner of the building, but there was no information. No name on the sign, no contact details, nothing. She asked around, but the other tenants didn't know either. They too were in the dark. Then, just as Rachel was about to give up, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't Mr. Thompson this time. She opened it to find a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a sharp suit, holding a briefcase. His presence was commanding, and Rachel felt a slight unease. "Are you Miss Rachel Carter?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" she replied, her heart racing slightly. "I'm Daniel Winters," he said, extending a hand. "I'm the new owner of this building." Rachel shook his hand, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She hadn't expected someone so formal. The last thing she wanted was another person to make her feel small. like Mr. Thompson had done so many times. I just wanted to introduce myself, Daniel continued, glancing down at his briefcase. I'm aware there have been some difficulties with the tenants. I'm here to address any concerns. Rachel didn't know what to think. She had expected a more distant approach, maybe even a repeat of Mr. Thompson's coldness, but this man seemed different. Still, she wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing. Well, there has been a problem with my eviction notice, she said cautiously. I'm struggling to find somewhere else to live, and… I know, he interrupted, his eyes softening just slightly. That's actually why I'm here. I've heard about your situation, Miss Carter, and I want to help. I've spoken to the other tenants, and I'm looking for ways to make things easier for everyone. Rachel stared at him, confused. You want to help? He nodded. Yes. I've been in your shoes before, and I understand how hard it can be. I don't want anyone to lose their home. A part of her couldn't believe it. It was too good to be true. A landlord, someone with actual compassion? She wanted to be skeptical, to guard her heart against the hope he was offering. But another part of her was desperate for things to change. She felt the weight of her exhaustion, the toll it was taking on her family, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of relief. But as Daniel spoke, there was a moment where his expression faltered. It was brief, but Rachel noticed it. And then she remembered something that made her heart stop. She had seen his face before. This wasn't just any man offering help. It was the same face she had seen on a photo, framed on the wall in the building's lobby. It was a photo of the old owners, who had suddenly disappeared after selling the property. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the pieces began to fit together. Daniel Winters wasn't just a businessman. He had a history with the building, and, possibly, with Mr. Thompson. What was really going on here? And why did he look so familiar? The answers were just out of reach, but she could feel it. This was far from over. Rachel's mind raced as she stood there, staring at Daniel Winters. The familiarity of his face gnawed at her, but she couldn't place where she had seen him before. Maybe it was just a coincidence, she thought, but something about him felt too rehearsed, too perfect. He seemed to notice her hesitation. Is something wrong? He asked, his voice still calm, but now with a hint of concern. Rachel quickly shook her head. No, nothing's wrong. I didn't expect this kind of help. I didn't know who the new owner was. I understand, he said, his expression softening again. But I assure you, I'm here to make sure things are handled fairly. I know how difficult it is to find stability, especially in a place like this. She nodded, though she still felt uneasy. The weight of the eviction notice still hung over her, and she couldn't ignore the growing suspicion in her gut. I'm grateful, she said, her voice quieter now. But I'm still not sure what to believe. After everything with Mr. Thompson, it's hard to trust anyone. Daniel seemed to understand, giving her a small, sympathetic smile. I get it. Trust is earned, not given. But if you give me a chance, I'll show you that I'm different. You won't have to worry about your family being pushed out of their home. His words were kind, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than he was letting on. There had to be a reason he was being so open, so willing to step in. The building had been sold quickly, and now here he was, with promises of support and compassion. I'm sorry, she said, suddenly feeling the need to ask the question that had been bothering her since the moment he walked through the door. But why does your face look so familiar? Have we met before? Daniel's smile faltered, just for a moment. He recovered quickly, but Rachel noticed. She saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Perhaps you've seen my picture, he said carefully. I've been involved in some charitable work in the city, and my face has been in the news a few times. I don't think we've met in person, but I understand why you might feel like you know me. Rachel didn't buy it. There was something off about his explanation, and she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. She felt like she was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Still, she couldn't deny that he was offering a lifeline. Maybe he wasn't the villain in this story. Maybe, just maybe, he was truly trying to help. I'll consider it, she said finally, though doubt lingered in her words. But I'll need time to think things through. Of course, Daniel replied, standing up. Take all the time you need. I'll be in touch soon, Miss Carter. As he walked away, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to take a turn she wasn't ready for. Something told her that Daniel Winters wasn't just another landlord, and whatever secrets he was hiding, they would soon come to light. But what if the truth was even more shocking than she could imagine? The days that followed felt like a strange limbo. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Winters and the promise he had made to help her and her family. She was grateful for the kindness, but the more she thought about it, the more questions lingered in her mind. What had he meant when he said he understood what it was like to struggle? What had he been involved in that had led to that knowing look in his eyes? Rachel didn't want to be suspicious. She wanted to believe in the good, especially after everything she had been through. But something felt off. She decided that the only way to get answers was to confront him. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Late one afternoon, as Rachel was getting dinner ready, there was another knock at the door. She wiped her hands on the apron and opened it, only to find Daniel standing there again, his briefcase in hand. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said with his usual calm demeanor, but Rachel could see the tension in his eyes. "I just wanted to follow up on our conversation." "No, of course," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in." They sat down at the small kitchen table, and Rachel took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. Winters," she began, trying to keep her voice steady, "I have to ask you something. You've said a lot about wanting to help, but I can't stop thinking. Why are you really here? Why did you buy this building? You keep saying that you understand what it's like to struggle, but I don't know if I can believe you." Daniel's expression didn't change. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully, but for the first time, Rachel saw a flicker of something that almost looked like guilt. "I understand why you're asking, Rachel," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "And I'll be honest with you, I didn't come here to make money. I didn't buy this building just because I wanted another property in my portfolio. I have personal reasons for being here. And yes, I know what it's like to struggle, but not in the way you think." Rachel leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "The truth is, I didn't just buy this building out of the blue. I've been working behind the scenes for months, trying to get it. The previous owner, Mr. Thompson, wasn't the only one running the show. There are people involved, people who've been making decisions that affect the lives of people like you and your family. And I was one of them." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying? You were working with him? You were part of the problem?" He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "Yes, I was. I was part of a group that helped push people out, people who couldn't pay their rent. I believed I was helping at first, but after seeing everything you've gone through, I realized just how wrong I was." The weight of his words settled in, and Rachel's mind raced. He had been part of the problem all along, yet now he was standing here, promising to help. Could she trust him? Could she believe that someone who had been part of the system that hurt her could suddenly change? "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice shaky with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Because," Daniel said, his eyes meeting hers, "I couldn't live with myself anymore. When I found out about your situation, when I saw what Mr. Thompson had done to you and your family, I realized I had to make things right. I couldn't keep being a part of a system that destroyed lives for profit." Rachel sat in stunned silence. It was more than she had expected, more than she had hoped for. She wanted to believe him, but deep down she wondered, was it too late for redemption? And if it wasn't, what would he do to make things right? As she looked at Daniel, she couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over yet. There were more pieces to the puzzle, more twists to come. And somehow, she knew they were just getting started. Rachel's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, disbelief, and, for the first time in a long while, a small spark of hope. Daniel's confession had shaken her to the core. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the sincerity in his eyes. She had been through so much already, and the idea that someone, even someone who had been part of the system that hurt her, might genuinely want to make things right, was both relieving and terrifying. "Can you really fix this?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly. After everything that's happened, can you undo the damage? Daniel took a deep breath, his expression hardening with determination. I can't undo everything, Rachel. But I can make sure that Mr. Thompson's tactics stop. I can promise you that you and your family will never face this kind of threat again. I'm going to offer fair leases, I'll be transparent with every tenant, and I'll make sure no one is pushed out without support. This building will be a place people can call home, not just a business. Rachel looked at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was a man who seemed truly burdened by his past actions. She wasn't sure if she could fully trust him just yet, but the change in his demeanor felt genuine. The part of her that wanted to protect her family, that wanted to believe in something better, couldn't ignore it. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. I don't know if I can forgive you for what you've been a part of, but I don't want to lose my home. I don't want to lose my family's stability. I understand, Daniel said, his voice soft but resolute, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make it right. Rachel sat back in her chair, processing everything. This wasn't the outcome she had expected, but it was the one she had desperately hoped for. She had been ready to fight tooth and nail, but now, with Daniel offering her a way out, offering all of them a chance to stay, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was room for change. Okay, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. I'll give you that chance, but I need you to prove it. I need to see it in action. Daniel's eyes lit up with relief, and he nodded. I will. I promise you won't regret this. And with that, Rachel felt a sense of resolve wash over her. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't going to let her guard down entirely. But for the first time in a long time, things felt like they were moving in the right direction. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, contracts, and changes that Rachel never could have imagined. Daniel kept his word. He sat down with each tenant, discussing their concerns, offering reasonable rent terms, and providing assistance for anyone who had fallen behind. The building was still far from perfect, but for the first time, it felt like a place of community, not exploitation. And then, just when Rachel thought the storm had passed, she got a phone call that would change everything. Miss Carter, it's the bank. The voice on the other end said, We've reviewed your case, and we've decided to offer you a loan. We're going to help you cover the back rent, and we'll set you up with a manageable payment plan moving forward. Rachel's heart stopped. This was it, the chance she had been waiting for. Not only had she found stability in her home, but now she had the financial support to keep it. Her family would be safe, and they would be able to start rebuilding their lives. As she hung up the phone, tears welled in her eyes. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Rachel opened it to find Daniel standing there, a slight smile on his face. I wanted to check in, he said, his tone light. I'm glad to see you're doing well. I just wanted to make sure you felt like the changes were having an impact. Rachel smiled back, a genuine, relieved smile. They are. Things are really starting to look up. Daniel nodded, but his expression softened. I'm glad to hear that. You deserve it. And in that moment, Rachel realized that life had a way of surprising her. She had come so close to losing everything, but in the end, she had found something unexpected, a chance for her family to thrive again. With Daniel's help, with the changes he had made, Rachel could finally see a future where they wouldn't just survive, but live. As for Daniel Winters, he had started out as the villain in her story. But now, as the days turned into weeks, Rachel knew that sometimes redemption could come from the most unlikely places. And sometimes, the people who hurt you the most could be the ones who changed your life for the better. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the story. If it left you thinking, feeling, or even a little bit surprised, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories like this. I'd love to hear what you think, so drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts or if you've ever experienced something similar. And if you think your friends would love this story too, go ahead and share it. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to bring you more exciting content soon.